and welcome to Critical Witness, where myself, Phil, and a good friend of mine, Dan, will be talking about theology, philosophy, ethics, you name it, books. We like books, and we're going to talk about Christianity as well. We've also got with us Jeremy Marshall, who has written a book and has also likes books, apparently. We've just found this out. So we might find ourselves talking quite a lot about books this evening. Feel free to join in. Because Jeremy's book is related to suffering and God and Christianity, that's probably where some of this conversation is going to go. But join in if you're watching and ask questions on the live chat. I'm going to let Dan introduce himself while I test the sound is working, and then we'll get Jeremy on as well. So Dan, say hello, and what's the idea behind this channel and why you want to be part of it?
Yeah, ahoy. So I'm Daniel Roger. I'm a sort of academic healthcare professional and bibliophile, so I love to read books. So it was nice chatting to Jeremy before we went live about our obsession with books. So the hope really for this channel is it gives me an opportunity to catch up with Phil a little bit more, so we don't live so close anymore, and also just to chat with interesting people and explore interesting questions. I'm a real, and I do devour podcasts a lot, and so I do get jealous listening to certain podcast hosts getting to chat with people that I'd love to have a natter with. So hopefully this gives me an opportunity to have those kinds of conversations with people like Jeremy. So
I'm just getting myself set up as well because I'm slightly off screen for the YouTube, which is great. So I'm just going to move my camera the right direction. There we go. Right. So Jeremy, how about we get you on then, and we're going to introduce Jeremy to the right screen. I'm not used to interviewing three people on here. So Jeremy, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your story? What do you do for a living? And then we'll start looking into what your book's about in a bit.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Phil. So I was born in Hertfordshire, live in Kent now. Married to Jeanette, 3 adult children. I worked in banking, I'm afraid, for 5 years. And I worked for 20 years for Credit Suisse, different parts of the world. And then about 12 years ago, I became chief executive of a family-owned private bank called Seahor & Co., which is one of the oldest in the world, still owned by the same family. I'm not working anymore. We'll come on to why that is in a minute. I'm involved in quite a lot of charities. I chair quite a few different charities, Christian, mainly, although I've been a trustee of the Woodland Trust, for example, so I'm quite interested in the environment. And I also, with a group of friends, we just bought a bank, as you do, called Kingdom, which is a Christian bank based near Nottingham. And that's me. I'm turning 57 on Friday, so I'm
Congratulations for Friday.
Yeah. I'm probably older than the two of you combined.
Oh, it's close.
We might just have you pipped.
Yeah. So you've written a book called Beyond the Big Sea.
Yes.
And that was released last year?
Yeah, that's right. Do you want me to tell you? Shall I tell you about it?
Yeah, to give us a synopsis, a rundown, because it's quite linked into your personal story, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Here's the book, Beyond the Big Sea. And the big sea is cancer, because 7 years ago I found a tiny lump on my ribs, and I eventually got referred, went to the Royal Marsden, which only does one thing, cancer. And they said, you've got this rare type of cancer called a sarcoma. And I went through treatment for about 6 months, and then everything seemed to go back to normal for about 2 years. And then almost exactly 5 years ago, just after David Cameron won the election, seems a long time ago now, I was at a friend's house here in Sevenoaks, and I went to adjust my collar here, and I felt a massive lump on my collarbone, like a golf ball. And within a few seconds, my life changed because I knew immediately what it was. It was cancer. I went back to the to the Marsden. They checked me out, did a few tests, and then a few days later, I went back in, and they told me, look, basically you've had it. You've got tumours everywhere. We're not quite sure how we missed those in the screening. I think eventually we found out it was a completely different type of cancer. It's non-pulmonary or extrapulmonary small cell lung cancer. And we can't cure you. And obviously the question you ask is, well, how long do you think I've got? And the answer was, well, 18 months. Now, like all these things in cancer, it's kind of a guess, right? But what's it like having cancer? It's hard. It's hard. I've had 24 chemos. I've had a dozen operations. I've had big problems with my eyes. I was blind for a while. I lost the sight in both eyes, one after the other, although I've got one back. And it's really hard. And the hardest thing is the impact it has on your family. Thank God I'm not in chemotherapy now, although I am being shielded. I just got my letter the other day, about 6 weeks late.
Well, okay, yeah.
Shield, yeah.
Goodness. So, I mean, how much of an impact has Corona had on that then? I'm guessing you haven't gone out much, being one of the ones that's shielded.
Well, what I say, Philip, is welcome to my world, because in the last 5 years, every time somebody coughed and sneezed near me when I was in chemo, I was very worried because I had no immune system. I was afraid. And now everybody's afraid, right? Previously, it was just me living with a sort of sword of Damocles over my head, and now everybody has that. So I feel God has somehow used this experience, which has been really tough, to maybe enable me to help other people now. And in fact, since lockdown began, and I was doing it in person before, but especially since lockdown began, about pretty much every night of the week, I've been doing something like this. I've done things with churches, with businesses, with students, groups of friends, anybody really just wants to chat about cancer. And as the subtitle of my book says, Hope in the Face of Death.
What a good title. And so I'm just really interested in the difference this has made to your walk and maybe even your evangelism to others, how you talk about Jesus, how you talk about God, how you talk about suffering. I'm personally interested in what that looks like from before this happened and maybe the shift while you're in it. Dan might have other questions, but maybe we can start with that. If someone was talking to you about God and suffering before this, what kind of answers would you have? Yeah.
I was a Christian before this happened, but I think this, and then this doesn't always happen with suffering, but in my case, it's brought me a lot closer to God. Especially, I would say the antidote to fear is the fear of God. And my story I love to retell is Jesus in the storm, where the disciples are terrified because they think they're going to drown. And eventually they roughly shake Jesus awake and says, don't you care, we're going to drown? So how do we feel in the storms of life? We doubt God's character, or maybe for some people watching, we even doubt God's existence. Then Jesus gets up, he rebukes the storm, and he also rebukes the disciples and says, why have you got such little faith? And then it says something curious, which is, it says then they were terrified. So in a mill pond of Lake Galilee, with not one breath of wind, not one even tiny wave, they're more afraid than in the storm. Why? Because it begins to dawn on them who this ordinary-looking rabbi asleep in the boat is, that he can still a storm. He can rearrange billions of molecules, and only God can do that. So, that's been my experience, that this has enabled me to know God more and know more what Jesus Christ is like. And that was the experience of the disciples. If they'd sailed, across the lake, like a picnic, but they wouldn't have known more about Christ. And that's what we need. That's what I need in suffering. On the second question, I think before all this happened, and I was very fortunate, really, Philip. I had a kind of been married 33 years, 3 lovely children. I never really had a day, ill in my life. I'd have probably given a more philosophical or theological answer. Now, we can come on to sharing our faith in a minute, but now I would say, what I say is this: I say only a suffering God can help us. which is a quote from the man we were talking about before we started, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, just before he was executed. He smuggled out of his jail cell a little piece of paper saying, only a suffering God can help us. So I think ultimately God's answer is not philosophy or theology, although those can be helpful, but a person, suffering person, the suffering servant. And that means that Jesus has been through everything that we've been through, but much worse. And I find that amazing. And maybe just to answer your last question, it definitely, if you want to become an effective evangelist, get cancer. That's my recipe. And, what it gives me is an urgency, because time is short. And Jesus said we must work while it's day, because the night comes when no one can work. And the night is death, right? Yeah. So death also, I'm afraid, applies to the Christian as well. So when we get to heaven and be with the Lord, it'll be great, but it'll be too late to evangelize. There's no non-Christians. There's no people who haven't heard about Jesus in heaven. So now is the gospel hour, and I feel this urgency. I've also, I think, tried to change maybe the way I share my faith. I don't know. I'm interviewing myself here. Sorry. Shall I keep?
No. It's really good. I'm enjoying listening, and that's absolutely fine.
Do jump in. So I found really amazing, which maybe some of the people watching have seen it. Is this the word one-to-one? It's simply John's gospel with notes, and it's ever so simple. You can probably see it there on the screen. The word one-to-one. You can look at the website. And lots of my friends who are not Christians are kind of intrigued about cancer and how I feel and stuff. And I don't mind talking about it. Some people don't like talking about it for whatever reason. I do. And when I'm chatting to them, I usually ask them 3 questions. I say, well, how about you? Do you have any particular beliefs? They know I'm a Christian. Did you ever look at the Bible? Most people know. Most people know nothing about the Bible at all. And then, would you like to have a chat with me about it? And quite a few people say yes. And it's pretty easy and straightforward. So I really encourage every Christian to have a go. Just ask a friend, would you like to have a chat with me about the Bible? And it's really what we should be about, is answering people's questions. So typically, I in the first place, I just sit down and go through the first 18 verses of John, which takes about 20 minutes. And as we go along, I just invite my friend, what would you like to know? And there's only 2 types of questions, Philip. Question 1, you know the answer. You tell them. Question 2, you say, I don't know the answer. Let me go and ask my pastor or a friend or something. And that's okay, because it's not about us. It's not about me, Jeremy. It's not about you. It's about supernatural word from God. So that's what we're trying to share with people. And I found it so easy and accessible. And I love doing it, but I also do quite a lot of Zoom calls and events and stuff. I spoke at half time on a Premier League football pitch. That was good fun.
Amazing. I think I saw you shared that on either one of the groups or one of the social media things that we're connected through. I think that's amazing. Dan, what have you got? Have you got anything to say on that?
I was going to ask something similar about how it changed your thinking about suffering, but Phil already asked that. So I was going to sort of next question was going to be around how do you think the gospel sort of offers hope to people who aren't believers, to people who don't give any sort of validity to the gospel? What hope does it offer them? Because it's not a hope that's hope of a life free from suffering. That's what people get confused. They think, and some people sell the gospel, believe the gospel to have a better life, a life free from suffering and things like that. But we can all agree that's not.
No, that's not the Christian offer. And in fact, in one of the Psalms, the psalmist says, when you go through fiery trials, or maybe that's Isaiah actually, when you go through the deep waters, Isaiah. So it's not if you go, it's when you go. So we will, if we're a Christian, we will go through suffering. In fact, I would say on average, you're more likely to suffer as a Christian than not. So there are people out there who kind of give a bogus so-called prosperity gospel, which is, believe in God and then you'll get a Ferrari. That's a lie. That's a devilish lie. No, the Christian faith is hopeful in that it offers a meaning, and it offers a saviour, a rescue from death. I mean, the Financial Times had recently an article by a lady therapist who said this crisis exposes that there is no one in control and there is no saviour. And that is a consistent atheistic view. And by the way, we all tend to think we are in control. And I thought before I had cancer I was in control because I was the chief executive. But from one day to another, I had to, I never went back to the office basically after the second diagnosis. But that is the kind of normative human path. Is there is no saviour, there is no control, and also there is no meaning. Our friend Richard Dawkins, who's probably the best recruiting sergeant the church ever had, says all the universe says to us is it speaks of blind, pitiless indifference. Dawkins is right, and this lady, the therapist, is right. Unless there is hope. Unless there is hope. And the Christian hope is that somebody has defeated death and offers us a way not to bypass death, because that's the famous verse, right? Yes, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. God does not say that he will bypass the valley of the shadow of death. And it's given to humans once to die, and after that, the judgment. But when we go through the valley of the shadow of death, he will be with us. And that, as I explained, makes all the difference to me. And it also means there's hope beyond the grave. I like to quote this in my book, but Eddie Izzard, the transvestite comedian, who's an interesting guy, actually, I've read several interviews with him. He said in a recent interview in The Guardian, when I was 6 or 7, my mother, Eddie Izzard's mother, died of cancer. And all my life, I've longed if only she or someone had come back through the clouds to tell us there's something there. So that desire for hope, that desire for a way out is extremely powerful. But it's only powerful, it's only helpful if it's true. Otherwise, it is, as Richard Dawkins says, a God delusion. So my friendly request to my non-Christian friends is have an open mind. Look into it. Because what I'm offering you is eternal life. I mean, it's not nothing to do with me. I'm just the agent, right? I'm passing it on. I'm the intermediary. But if it's true, it's the most important thing in the universe. And is it true? Because I think people who are not Christians think we're asking them to believe something that's not true. Which is in fact what Richard Dawkins says. Dawkins says faith is believing things you don't really think are true. No, I would say I'm a Christian because I believe it is true. Now, by it, I mean the resurrection, especially. That's the sort of centerpiece, the cornerstone of the Christian faith, in my view.
Yeah, I know Tim Keller says something similar, and I'm sure you, as a fellow Kellerite, he talks about that we don't follow a saviour who only suffers for us, but suffers with us. I've always found that I could get a sense of that and what you were saying. I guess sort of zooming out a little bit, a lot of sort of skeptics would kind of bring out talk about sort of the issue itself of natural evil. Have you given much thought to that question? The sort of problem of sort of natural evil. We're in the midst of a pandemic. Natural evil at the moment. How would you sort of respond to skeptics who might bring that up?
Well, clearly there is natural evil. There's also moral evil. Yeah, there's a coronavirus, but there's a mass murderer, right? Both are just a different type of evil. They're two variations of the same form. So I guess the question is, well, where does evil come from? And I think the Bible says because we live in a fallen world, if you like, evil and its sort of henchmen, suffering and death and fear of, if you like, broken into our house by night. We're lying in bed, sleep, and suddenly we hear breaking glass and we realise, evil has sent fear, suffering and death in, and death is going to get us. So where did it come from? Natural evil, same place really as moral evil comes from, which is ultimately there is evil in the universe. That Christians believe that evil has a physical manifestation, a spiritual manifestation, if you like, which is a being, the devil. But the devil himself is a created being. We don't believe as Christians in Manichaeism, which is a kind of God and the devil on the same level. Christian belief is that God made the whole universe and everything in it. He made these spiritual beings, angels, and one of them fell. One of them rebelled against God, and that's the devil. Now, why did God allow that to happen? I don't know. But what I do know is that we are responsible for our moral choices. And yeah, coronavirus is an external evil, but the truth is that there's evil within each one of us. And actually, it doesn't take much to bring that to the surface. I've just been watching Breaking Bad. Have you guys seen that?
Massive fan.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if the guy who wrote it is a Christian, but he certainly has a Christian worldview because, spoiler alert for those of you who are watching this, Walt, who's the kind of mild-mannered chemistry teacher, his original sin is pride because he has cancer like me and he won't accept an offer of help. So he decides, I'm not going to take this free gift. I'm going to manufacture meth. And boy, oh boy, does one sin lead to another. So, yeah, look, there is external evil in the world. There is cancer. And why God sets things up the way he does, I don't know. If I knew everything about that, I'd be God, I guess, which I'm rather far from being the case. So I don't have all the answers about where evil comes from, but I believe there is a solution to evil. I don't know the origins of evil, but I know how we can get rid of it, which Christians believe is through the cross, which was the most evil act in the universe, but actually rebounded on the devil and means that we can get back to God. So, yeah, if somebody asks me, what about evil, what about suffering, I'd take them to the cross.
It was interesting you mentioned Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is it's probably my favourite TV series I've watched, and I've watched quite a few. And it's interesting. I was listening to a few clips earlier today, and comparing your response, a Christian response to your terminal cancer diagnosis, and looking at Walter White's. And if you watched it all the way through, Jeremy?
No, don't, because I've got another eight episodes. I mean, I'm halfway through series 5, so don't tell me what happens.
Okay, because it's there's a very poignant scene towards the end, and I'm not going to go into detail, and I'm not going to ruin it for you. But it's one of my favourite scenes where he just talks about his motivations for what he did, why he did it, and I kind of look forward to you getting to it, because when you watch that scene, you'll know what I was talking about when he's talking with Skylar, and he's talking about his Skylar is Sky? I can't remember
his wife. That's right.
Yeah, and there's just and I think for people listening as well, you'll see the different responses there between Walter's sort of hopeless, nihilistic response, selfish response, and yours, which are polar opposites. So it's quite interesting. So when do you reckon you'll get through it?
Well, we're watching 1 or 2 episodes a night. We would be watching one now, but some 2 young guys wanted to interview me on a podcast.
I'd love to sit and rewatch that again soon. It's one of those series that I love it so much that I want to watch it with someone else. I'm always at the edge of my seat, like, I wish I just have to watch this bit. It's a fantastic series.
Yeah, it's good. Highly recommend it. Definitely a different outlook on pain and suffering than what we're talking about today.
You mentioned a bit. Sorry, Phil. You're going to say something? Okay, because once I get on a roll,
you go for it.
You mentioned a bit about some of your sort of charity work. So I'd be interested to find out a little bit more about how you got involved with OCCA, great organisation, and also to talk a bit more about the environment as well, about why Christians should care about the environment.
Yeah, great.
What on that. So
how did I get involved with OCCA, the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics, which is part of Ravi Zacharias globally? It's quite simple, actually. A friend of mine, John Riches, years ago said, You'll really like this, because like you, Daniel, I like to read and I like to discuss ideas and stuff. And I went along and I heard Michael Ramsden speaking, and I think John Lennox, and I thought, wow, these guys are amazing. I love their tagline, helping the believer think and the thinker believe, which is great. And if there's one thing that I particularly love about what they do, they have a fantastic thing called Reboot, which is aimed at young people, 12 to 18-year-old Christians and not. Because I really feel strongly that as Christians, we must allow teenagers, I'm thinking here especially of teenagers and students who grow up in Christian homes, to debate and argue and ask questions. Again, because we believe that there's a rational basis for it. I think often we're afraid of arguing. My father, who was a real character, he was a pastor, he used to take us Bible smuggling every summer behind the Iron Curtain. He was quite strict, but this was a long time ago, right, the 60s and 70s. But you could argue about absolutely anything with him, including, I don't believe in God, or the Bible's full of errors, or even you're such a boring preacher. And he would allow his children, his teenage children especially, to debate and discuss. And I think that's really important. And Reboot is amazing. People like Amy Orr Ewing and others, Tanya Walker, they have well over 1,000 young people, and they tackle head on all the difficult questions like, is God anti-gay? Is God racist? Is God sexist? What does the Bible say about money? And all these kind of hot topics. It's great. I absolutely love it. And it's the same principle as we believe in Christianity because it's true. Well, that means we should also be open to people arguing the toss with us.
Yeah, no, I know a fair bit about Reboot. I've got 7 years before my oldest daughter's able to go, so I've got a little while yet. But no, they're a great organisation, and I love what you were saying about like debating and stuff with children and stuff. I think it is important, and try and make sure that they feel comfortable asking difficult questions and. Something you try and facilitate as a parent.
Completely agree with all that. Just something I'm very grateful for is being able to work through big issues and taking scripture seriously and working that through, wrestling that, all very important stuff. Dan piqued my interest when he was about to ask a question on the environment side of things as well. So where's that taking you? Just following on from what you said, that you're interested in the environment. Why should Christians be so interested if we're going to be taken away from this planet in the end? Well, that's theology potentially, but feel free to clarify that.
Yeah, the Bible says that God will make a new heaven and a new earth. Everything will be remade, but in the meantime, we're like tenants of a stately home. Stour Head, for example, which is the Hall family one, beautiful gardens. And imagine that you've been put in as the tenants and the owner is going to come back. You have to look after it. You can't just crash it. And God is the owner. God is the Hall family, and I'm the estate manager, if you like. And we must look after it. And creation is good, and humans are wrecking it. I guess, like a lot of things in life, my father, as I mentioned, was quite eccentric. He was very interested in the environment as well as Bible smuggling. He used to do like guerrilla environmental activity on the motorways. This was a long time ago. Probably the police were not as strict, but he used to stop and plant trees and bulbs and stuff on the M25 and on the motorway. One time his car was parked on the side of the motorway, and one of the people in his church was driving by and they recognised his car. And they thought, oh dear. John's broken down, so they pulled in front. They couldn't see him, and then they could see him bending over right at the top of the bank. Oh, crumbs, he's being sick or something. So you're right. He said, "Oh, don't worry, I'm just planting daffodils." So, yeah. And then at university, as God would arrange, my roommate was a wonderful guy called Chris Naylor, who was for many years the head of our Rocha, and which is a fantastic Christian environmental organisation. It's Portuguese for the rock. And we went out several times to see Chris and his family, his wife Susanna and their 3 children, Sam, Chloe and Josh in Lebanon. They spent 15 years there, and Chris and his team turned basically a kind of environmental disaster area, marsh, into a beautiful flourishing wetland. Now, tragically, and again, this is the same thing as to why this happened, I don't know. Last October, Chris and Susanna were on a field trip in South Africa with another couple, Peter and Miranda Harris. Peter and Miranda founded a Rocha and handed over to Chris and Susanna, and they had a car accident. And Chris and Susanna and Miranda were killed instantly. leaving their 3 children, who obviously I'm very friendly with, and I went to the memorial service and also to the crematorium, and that's really hard. So yeah, even more so, I would say, because of Chris's and Susanna's amazing example. I'm even more interested in the environment now. And the organisation I got involved in was the Woodland Trust. So I just love trees. My children always laugh when we watch Lord of the Rings. The Ents say, nobody loves the trees, and they all say, Dad does. So, they call me a tree hugger. I don't know why. I just think there's something amazingly beautiful about trees. So, yeah, for years I was a trustee of the Woodland Trust. It's an amazing organisation. And the wonderful thing about trees is you just need tiny acorns, right? You take a barren field, you take a group of school children, you let them loose, with maybe little saplings, tiny things. Some of the children put them in the wrong way up. You have to show them how to do that. You come back 10, 15 years later, it's a forest, a mighty forest is growing. They're absolutely stunningly beautiful things, trees. And I think Christians should love trees in particular. The Bible is full of references to trees.
Yeah. It's it's interesting because I'll be honest, sort of trees and environmentalism were probably locked away in the box in my brain where I don't really care about stuff too much for quite a while. And it's only recently I've started to think about the should a Christian view the environment and the earth differently? Should there be a difference between, should Christians kind of be on the forefront of this kind of thing? And I think I was thinking about it recently is we tend to, because most of the people I know who really care about an environment tend to be sort of vegan environmentalists who chain themselves to trees. You kind of see that as like, well, that's kind of the only option, but there's definitely a case to be made for a sort of rational environmentalism where, like you said, we plant trees, we don't recklessly destroy nature. We're a little bit more sensible with how we shop and making sure we recycle. And maybe I'll get more extreme, but definitely at the moment I'm definitely much more conscious of the impact that my lifestyle and my family's lifestyle can have on the environment, and that I should care about an environment because that's what that God has gifted us the earth to live on, and we should treat it well.
I think that's right, Dan. I think another thing is what business are Christians in? We're in the hope business, right? We're in the hope business, not the hopeless business. So one of I think the challenges with climate change is to give people hope. And because we can feel dwarfed by the vast scale of the project. I mean, a guy called Dave Bookless, who was also at university with Chris and I, has written a very good book called Planet Wise, which is for Christians on how to care for the planet. But the particular thing I would recommend to Christians is go and plant trees. Yeah, if you care about the future, if you believe in that God will one day redeem everything, plant some trees. There'll be trees in heaven. So get out there and join the Woodland Trust and Arosha and start planting is my message. Yeah, I think a danger on both the sharing our faith side and the environment side is we just give up. We're defeatist. This is one of my favourite I did history at university. It's one of my favourite historical quotes, which I think can apply to the church and to the environment. In 1914, the German army was about to defeat the French army. There was also a tiny British expeditionary force of 4 divisions, which was a peanut. And there were 110 German divisions, and they were getting very, very near to Paris. So near that the French government ordered all the files to be burnt in the French capital. Paris was covered with thick black smoke. And it looked like you could hear the German artillery. They crossed the Marne, which is the last river before Paris. Now, a French general called Marshal Foch, who's got a fantastic statue at Victoria, he rallied his troops and he drove them back, the so-called miracle on the Marne. And after that, there was trench warfare anyway. But Foch said this. He said, my left wing gives way, my centre is non-existent, position excellent, I attack. And that's what Christians should be like. We should realise, we're in a world where everything's giving way, even more so coronavirus, but we have hope that we should attack. Now, that doesn't mean that we literally attack our enemies, right? We should love them, but we should go on the front foot. We should be on the offensive. We shouldn't give up. We shouldn't be defeated. Never.
Well, you'd be very pleased, Jeremy. I've got a lovely big eucalyptus tree that I planted last summer. Some bamboo, couple of palm trees. So I'm trying to do my bit. And my daughter's planted a tree as well. So
Good. What? Yeah. Which kind of tree?
horse chestnut.
Okay, that's good. All of those, by the way, are not native species, but that's okay. Even the horse chestnut was introduced by the Romans, but that's okay. We forgive you, brother. I give you an indulgence.
I just love the look of a eucalyptus tree. I just love them. So I just they grow up to the right conditions, about 6 foot a year. So
yeah, they're amazing. Just don't plant them too near your house.
yeah. Well, I've planted as far back as I can, but I've seen how big they grow, so I might have to get it lopped maybe in a couple of years. Stop it.
See, an acorn in an oak is really an image of the Christian faith, because if we plant an acorn, we're never going to see the full-grown oak, because oaks take hundreds of years. Oaks can live for 1,000 years, 300 growing, 300 mature, 300 dying. And by the way, they're the most productive in the last 300 years. So there are trees in England that were alive when William the Conqueror landed. Isn't that amazing? But that's the same thing in the Christian faith. What are we doing? We're planting seed. We're planting acorns. And people did that. You know, the early church planted it, and one acorn produced a tree, and another, and so on, until eventually the acorn came to us. So we must have hope, not just sharing our faith with our non-Christian friends, which we must do, but the hope for the future. We're on the winning side. So I think for the church in the UK, we often feel defeated and troubled, and there are problems and troubles. I'm not saying we should speak kind of everything's wonderful, because it's clearly not. In many ways, the church has been in retreat in England for 200 years. But ultimately, God will win. The devil will be defeated, and sin and evil and death will be made away with. So we have this wonderful hope, and at dark times like this, we must encourage each other with that hope.
I think that's one of the main things that I've come to hold really dear in my own faith, is that understanding of what we are looking forward to. So I mean, the joke about being taken away from this earth was a joke. The new creation hope that we have is incredible, and I think when it comes to suffering and looking at things like the coronavirus, the fact that everything else in this time that we pinned our hopes and dreams on, finance, job, in some ways family, church, the actual like social aspects of it that we think might save us, the routine, all these things that we pin everything on have just sort of evaporated before us and we have to kind of try and grab things back, and that hope of one day these things that are like smoke will actually be made new and will be sustained forever in the way that they were intended to be, as well as our bodies that are currently sick and corrupt, and our thoughts is also in that way. We have this amazing hope that everything will be made new. That's something that's so powerful beyond anything atheism can offer or any other faith can offer, and from what I've looked at. So I think that's really potent. I wonder if that's part of the issue of the church being a retreat is because half the church think we're going away from the world, like we're going into some ethereal heaven with harps and babies. And I don't know if you've found that in your circles. Do people get the idea of heaven or what that is?
No, I don't. I think neither Christians nor non-Christians have an idea. I mean, as you said, we all have this idea of sort of, people have a mental image of heaven. It's fluffy clouds and people in white bed sheets playing harps, but that's not in the Bible. No, heaven is basically about the presence of God. God will dwell with his people, no more suffering, and it will be amazing. Yeah, and it's something incredible, and a new heaven and a new earth. As I think Sam says in Lord of the Rings, that everything that's gone wrong is being undone. So everything that's wrong and evil and suffering will be undone. On the other hand, in hell is just the opposite of that, which is not devils with pitchforks, which again is not an image in the Bible. It's the absence of God. And it's also, it is solemn, God's silence. God's silence. That's the most solemn thing. When Jesus is on trial, he has nothing to say to Herod, not a word. And that is solemn. But the good news is that this isn't, we're fortunately, most of us not in the position of Herod, who had obviously, done many terrible things, and although I would believe even Herod was not completely beyond God's mercy, but yeah, God still speaks, and he speaks words of invitation and words to come to him. So yeah, actually the Bible has relatively little to say about heaven, probably because I think it's too mind-blowing. I always love that C.S. Lewis quote where he says heaven is like trying to explain to two urchins playing in the slums what a 2-week holiday by the seaside would be like. It's just, we imagine it.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Dan, have you got any other questions? We've been going on for 45 minutes, and I don't want to spend too much of your time, Jeremy. I appreciate you're spending time with us.
I guess I wouldn't mind. I'm sure other people listening might find it helpful as well. Given you've already admitted to being a bibliophile before we came on, what sort of, other than your own book, which I will be getting a copy of, recommend that others do as well. We can make sure we'll put a link somewhere for people to access that. Yep. What 5 books do you think that all Christians should read, other than the Bible? Because I know someone smart will say, "What about the Bible?"
Yeah,
I know it's more than just one book.
Okay, well, in no particular order then, Dan. How much time have we got? Do you want me to do a quick fire?
We've got time. It's more just awareness of your time, really. So yeah.
So I would say it's always good to start with a couple of classics, right? I'll give 2 older ones and 3 modern ones. So one older one I would say is a book by a man called Thomas Boston called The Crook in the Lot. Boston was an 18th century Scottish divine who had a really, really hard life. He knew a lot about suffering. And the crook in the lot is nothing to do with crime and parking. It's about Ecclesiastes, which says who can make straight what God has made crooked. So Boston's thesis, which he demonstrates very ably, and it's not a long book, unlike many of the Puritan ones, is that God puts something bent, something wrong in our life, and he does it for a purpose, to teach us about himself and also to teach us humility. So I found that a great book, really helpful, and it's not very long, and it's very readable. In coming forward 100 years, I can't pass over what's probably, in my view, one of the greatest Christian authors of all time, J.C. Ryle, the first Bishop of Liverpool. And Ryle was just a fantastic writer. And if I had to pick one of his books, it's his expository thoughts on the Gospels. So that they're multi-volumes covering all 4 Gospels, but they are so helpful and so powerful. And Ryle writes in a really personal, warm, direct way. It's almost like he's kind of pointing his finger at you. And where as Christians must we take our stand? We must take it on the Gospels, right? The Lord Jesus. And how can we know the Gospels better? J.C. Ryle's the man. Okay, now 3 modern books. I think one challenge we've got in the church is that we just don't understand what the Bible's about. We don't understand, if I may say, God's big picture. So that's something that is the title of a book by a friend of mine, Vaughan Roberts, who's a vicar at St Ebbe's in Oxford. And it's a great book, and again, not very long, which just does what it says on the tin. It explains what the Bible is about. The arc, as theologians like to say, is God's story from A to Z and the bits in between. And I think as Christians, we often miss that and kind of end up confused about, well, what's the Bible all about? I've got to recommend one book by Keller. I guess there's so many. Probably The Prodigal God, I think, is his best. Although I like The Reason for God as well a lot. They're all good. But The Prodigal God is just a fantastic way of basically telling the gospel story. And I find it such a go-to story. I mean, basically, in a lot of my apologetics, I just rehash Keller. I don't suppose you mind. I don't plagiarize him directly, but yeah, I just try and read his books and rehash them, basically. So that Prodigal God is an absolutely fantastic book. Amazing. I guess maybe I should include a biography as well. And an amazing man of God who died actually 40 years ago, and on my blog, which I'm sure all your readers will port to after this, which is JSJ Marshall Blogspot.
I just need to just cut in a little bit there with just to bring in your expectations for our our viewership at the moment.
I have an idea, Philip, of like tens of thousands of people.
Lucky 10.
I'm quite happy for you to plug your book and your blogspot, but I don't think you'll see much traffic at this point.
The vision of your, your podcast, your video cast, Philip, like, the number one probably today will be Elon Musk's baby with a strange name, and you'll be number two. That's my vision.
Is that your vision?
That's what you told me before. Your audience was like,
sorry.
yeah.
Well, yeah. I thought by the end of the interview I could actually be honest with you.
We'll get you back. We'll get you back as things work out and the audience grows. We'll have to get you back.
Once you reach double figures, in a couple of years. Let me finish my book recommendation. So there's an amazing man of God who actually, as a boy, I met several times. He came to our house, called Martin Lloyd-Jones. Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah.
He's a Welsh preacher, an amazing man. And I think it's always good to have a Christian biography. And Ian Murray, who's still alive, who was the founder of the Banner of Truth, he's written a very large 2-volume one, but there's also a smaller one, which is very readable. And I think Lloyd-Jones speaks powerfully to today. His preaching was called Logic on Fire. And that's a good way to think of it. So those are my 5. Thomas Boston, Crook in the Lot. J.C. Ryle, Expository Thoughts on the Gospel. Vaughan Roberts, God's Big Picture. Tim Keller, Prodigal God. And Ian Murray, Martin Lloyd-Jones. And please buy them all from 10 of those. Otherwise, Jonathan Carswell will shoot me. He's a great guy. And he's right. We shouldn't support Amazon. We should support Christian. There are other ones as well. But anyway, I think the world of Jonathan and his dad. So go to 10ofthose.com.
Yeah, that's a good shout. I recommend that. I'll put links to 10 of those in the description rather than Amazon links, so happy with that.
Yeah, there's Tim Keller books. I mean, I've thought a lot of Making Sense of God, his one of his more recent books, and it's really interesting how The Reason for God, which I really liked, I think that was published 2008, and how dated The Reason for God is compared to Making Sense of God. It's really interesting. It's sort of 10 years after that was published, how the questions that people have dramatically changed.
Yeah.
If you read The Reason for God, there's nothing about identity and less stuff about meaning and things like that. And that's become much more prominent in that sort of 10 to 12 years afterwards. And The Reason for God is, I thought it was a great book that I tend to recommend to.
By the way, another very good book, I'll give you a 6, is Confronting Christianity by Rebecca McLaughlin.
I've read that last year. It's excellent.
I've heard good things. I need to get that on my reading list.
It is it's good. It had an American feel to it. I don't know, is she American?
No, she's a Brit actually, but she lives.
But she's in America.
But you can't, poor Americans, right? I've got an American son-in-law. It's not their fault,
No.
They can't.
But it's interesting because when you read sort of American Christian books like apologetics, the questions are not that we're not always asking the same questions. There's definitely overlap, but I definitely got the sense, when I was reading some of the questions, I was thinking I've no one I speak to asks those some of those questions. But for what it did, it was an excellent book. I really, really liked it, and one I would would definitely recommend people read. And
I definitely find that with the conversation that you see, even on the UK apologetics and evangelism channel, you can see the teachers that people engage with, and then also their outlook on culture and society. And there are some really heavy American influences in British Christianity, but often the cultural differences are more subtle. And I've definitely witnessed that in the way people talk about faith. You go, that's very, very American. Not necessarily that it's bad, but it just doesn't translate. We're not dealing with Trump in the same way that they are. We're not dealing with coronavirus in the same way they are. We're not worried about guns in the same way they are. And it all those big American issues seem to travel all over the Atlantic. And
which is what the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics is so good, because you know, the people there are, well, they're not just Brits, but they're not particularly Americans, and we need to adjust our apologetics to the cultural context we're in. OCCA also, and ASIM International also has people all over the world. Has people in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, in Africa, Middle East, Asia, the lot. So yeah, it's really good organisation.
They've been publishing some really good books as well. My friend Joe works for the Good Book Company, and OCCA have been publishing books from them. So obviously John Lennox has recently brought out that short book on coronavirus, and there's a number of books published by people from OCCA via them that are excellent. Again, really good books. So,
I think that plays a big part of why they are so good, is that they've got such a wide base of thought that isn't just one culture. I think that is a quality in them that is often missed from very West American apologetics. I find when you go on the internet, half the problems with Christianity, the problems in quotation marks that people have, are cultural. Are reading an American or even English, English people do this as well, an English understanding of the world into the text and going, well, that doesn't make sense, therefore it's false. And OCCA are very good at drawing those out. I noticed that Abdu Murray and Ravi Zacharias are releasing a book which is talking about shame and honour, but also how that links into the West.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Something with Jesus from the East or something like that. But
Jesus through Eastern eyes, I think that's it. Yeah, or something like that.
Yeah. So there's some really important things. I think that conversation needs to be had more. And I saw a clip from Abdu Murray on how shame is influencing Western culture now, and the shame culture, the cancel culture, the I'm offended by you, therefore you can't speak to me, or I'm offended by your ideology, therefore I'm going to shut it down. It's not, I'm going to talk it through. So I think even from making sense of God, the shift in culture is changing as well, and will be interesting to see where apologetics and evangelism comes in to play.
It's also why we must stand up for freedom of speech. It's very, very important, including the British Humanist Association, Richard Dawkins. We should be absolutely four square with them. Every right.
Can I ask one more question? Is that right? So obviously what's very different about the US is they have you almost have in a sense sort of Christian celebrities, in a sense, like that Christians have still much more of an impact on culture than we do. It's not always positive, often negative, but over here we don't have that. If you were sort of speaking to Christians, who should Christians in this country be listening to, do you think? What sort of Christian thinkers, maybe not just people at OCCA as well, but other sort of Christian leaders or thinkers, who do you think we should be listening to?
What, alive or dead?
Yeah, alive. No, I'm talking today. Who is there? In my head, I'm thinking, personally, one person I love that people read and listened to a lot more was someone like Andrew Wilson. I'm not sure if you know about Wilson.
Think theology.
Yeah. So I'm sort of thinking of someone, someone that maybe doesn't have the largest following, that maybe we should be sort of listening to.
Yeah, some people we should either read or listen to. Ian Paul. I'm not even sure how to pronounce the name of his website, Sepp Heiser or something like that.
Yeah, that's very good. I've been engaging that recently.
He's fantastic. Really got
some amazing
stuff.
He's written a really good commentary on Revelation that I'm working through at the moment, alongside a couple others. Yeah,
Ian is one of these people who just churns out a constant stream of ideas. A guy who's fantastic, who's a real character, who's got both a blog and a podcast, is Steve Neal. Knele. Have you heard of him? Building Jerusalem.
No.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine. Right, this is what you call log rolling when you recommend your friends.
Please do. This is helpful.
He's a pastor in Oldham. and he's very, very strong on churches in deprived places, as is Mes McConnell.
Yeah, no, McConnell.
Then another guy who I think is really influential, I think he's a real man for our times, is John Stevens, who's the head of the FIEC. He's got a blog called johnstevens.com. And yeah, John's a big man in every sense of the world. He's one of the few people I have to look up to. He's about 6'7", and he every day he's tweeting, publishing ideas. He thinks very deeply. He's very interested in kind of culture and other things. So yeah, those are Ian Paul, Steve Neal, and John Stevens. We should probably. I feel bad I haven't got a woman blogger or podcaster to recommend. Well, Glenn Scrivener, I guess. Well, he's a guy. He's very good.
I'll link him to that timestamp. That's brilliant. I think that's
cool. You did recommend the book by Rebecca.
That's all right.
So,
I've got 3 sisters, so I can just imagine them watching this and giving me a hard time. So, yeah.
There's lots of good women apologists with Ocker.
Amy Ewing.
I should. Amy Ewing's got a fantastic book, Can We Trust the Bible, which is brilliant. Yeah. And Tanya Walker. Thank you guys. You bailed me out there.
No worries. That's help. We'll have to get one of them on this fledgling YouTube channel soon.
Please, any for the right fee, I can get you anybody you like.
Yeah, no, you're our contact now, Jeremy, because you're the first person we've interviewed.
Wow, okay.
So we've not done this before. We're just sort of.
Yeah, no. Tell me. I'd be happy to recommend it. But yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate that.
Yeah. No, it's a real pleasure, and it's always nice to put a face to the name we see on the UK Apologetics Facebook group. So.
Cool. All right.
I really appreciate your time, Jeremy, and we'll sign off here, and we'll be in touch for those names.
And let me know when your circulation gets to 10. Right, we'll have a party.
Yeah, all right. Sounds good.
See you. Bye.
Cool. Cheers, Jeremy. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So thanks to Jeremy. We're still live, Dan, so don't pick your nose, and we'll sign off there. I mean, I think for a first interview, that was pretty positive. And,
it was really nice. Jeremy's a good guy.
Yeah, nice to chat to him. So I'll sign off, I guess. We don't have a tagline yet. Critical witness. We'll think of something to go alongside that, but we'll sign off and stop the stream. And if you're watching this at some point, feel free to give us a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel. We'd like to get
recommend someone.
Yeah, maybe share it with someone if you've enjoyed it. If you haven't enjoyed it, well, keep your comments to yourself. If you have any recommendations for God and Suffering book-wise, please stick them in the comments as well. And give us feedback if you like. We'll take it on board potentially. if we're so inclined. Cool. This is Laugh. Cheers, Dan. Good to chat. We'll catch up soon. Stop the stream.
Stop.